Welcome to Flourish, the podcast. My name is Frank Bernard, and I'll be your host for this episode. Wherever you're listening from, we welcome you. Arthritis is a painful disease, and millions of Canadians suffer in silence from it. That's why we're here to talk about the quiet and often misunderstood challenges that are associated with it. We hope this will help you flourish with arthritis. Our guest today is Laurie Proulx from Ottawa. Laurie has been living with juvenile idiopathic arthritis for over 30 years since her diagnosis in her teenage years. She's a wife and the mother of two children aged 13 and 8. She is a board member and the second vice president of CAPA, the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, where she actively advocates for policies and practices that would benefit people living with arthritis. Being immunocompromised, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought uncertainty and questions to her life and forced her to adapt to a new reality. Today, we lean in to find out how she's been navigating the pandemic. Laurie, welcome to Flourish, the podcast.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us about last year, how this last year has been for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a challenging time. There's no doubt. I think, like everybody, regardless of whether you have arthritis or not, has had to adapt and shift. But I guess being immunocompromised and I have an additional few considerations to account for at the end of the day. So at first, really, it was fear, right? Because I've had a lot of serious infections, even myself. I haven't always been well, and of course, I know that my medicines are, compromise my immune system. So, given all this, I think I very actively sort of, stayed home. I was fortunate that I have, a job I can work from home and these sorts of things. Not everyone is as fortunate, of course, but really just kind of hunkered down with my family, my two kids, and my husband too is sort of in a similar position. So we've been really aggressively, I guess, physically distancing from people and being very, very careful. And that transcends to shopping or play dates that my kids have, or rather don't have with their friends. And so it's just brought like a heightened sense of anxiety and insecurity, I guess. But it's also brought us closer. I'd like to think that there's been some positive elements as well to all of it. I think we've become sort of closer as a family and doing more together because, that's, we just have each other really. And, at the end of the day, because we've been limiting our contacts so aggressively to protect me.
Yeah, and so what has it been like for your family then? Obviously it brought changes for your personal life, but also might have changed some of the family dynamics as well.
Yeah, it's been tough on some level. Like I have a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old. So my oldest is my daughter, and she's seen me, ill, like quite ill, and in and out of hospital sometimes, and not feeling well. So I think she understands a little bit more. So I think for her, and we've had some scares as well, right? She got ill with a cold. It ultimately ended up being in the end last fall. And so I also ended up getting it, like I often, so often do because of the medications I take. I tend to get more colds and, viruses of various sorts. But I think it was really anxiety provoking for her, right? And then she was worried because she is going into school physically. That was a really hard decision in and of itself. But yeah, so she's going into school and she just felt like she was to blame, unfortunately, for, all that we were going through. And I think it created a lot of extra stress for her. And probably, revisiting some of the prior memories that she had of me not being well, and sort of brings those forward a little bit more. But also, I've had to say, no to some of the play dates with friends. She's 13 or just turned 13 last May. First birthday, not really celebrated in the traditional way. So we managed to find ways to have like outdoor things that she could see her friends and trying to make it as safe as possible, but just also just, it kind of can be stressful, right? Because, they're 13, and you have to, create, set your expectations to that level, of a 13-year-old, and they're not going to make decisions like you make decisions. So, but, she's been great, but it does cause a lot of, additional stress, unfortunately, for her and for me. My son, I guess it's been a little easier because he's younger in a way. And I know that, because of our work situation and home situation, we are able to do the virtual school for him. So he's been home, and we can sort of cut him off more clearly at the end of the day. But then again, there's like negatives to that as well. You worry about the effect of, a year of really not seeing his friends except for a few like outdoor encounters and that sort of thing. So I really hope that come fall, we can put him back into school full time, and yeah, feel confident with the vaccines rolling out that I'll be protected. So then it means my whole family can sort of go back to whatever life is like, and at least resume whatever our lives will look like, when the next school year starts. So, but yeah, it's hard. I mean, you feel bad, and it's now part of their childhoods, but I suppose it's the part of the childhoods of so many people, or so many children out there, that they'll truly remember this, when they're adults reflecting back on this time.
Yeah, and I would imagine it will change, not only children's but adults' way of doing things. Maybe a more health conscious habits will be developed. Washing hands, being a bit more careful in transportation and that kind of stuff. You talked about how it brought changes into their lives as well. So what's a typical weekend looking like for your household?
Yeah, a lot of home projects of one sort or another. So, I mean, one thing we actively did this winter, because I mean, the winter being the hardest, I live in Ottawa, so we get lots and lots of snow. So, we tried to embrace it a little bit more this year. I mean, unfortunately, I'm not able to skate, but the kids, my husband was, ended up doing a ring for outdoors. And so actually the kids got to be quite good, at skating, I guess, because they've had their own personal skating rink. But I noticed that a lot, even in our neighborhood. There's, you'll go for a walk maybe in the evening, because we've been doing a lot more of that as well. Just regular activities to get out and about in the neighborhood. We live in a suburb, so there are some recreational trails available to us. So, but yeah, a typical weekend is pretty low key. We, we've been doing more projects too around the house, and sometimes try to get the kids recruited into that. A lot of the same stuff though. On the other hand, with my daughter, she's got lots and lots of homework at the at the grade she's at, so she's doing that, and just trying to do more home projects and games and watching movies together, home movies, and just doubling down, I guess, on home life and all that it brings to try to stay safe and stay well.
You mentioned transitioning to working from home. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I guess I've been fairly fortunate. I was, I guess one of the positive things of being diagnosed at such a young age, I was 14 when I was diagnosed, is that it really influenced, what sort of career I chose and the work that I do. Folks that aren't, that are diagnosed at a later point in life, often they've had to make those difficult transitions later on. So I guess one positive thing of being diagnosed at a young age. So I mean, my work sort of fits with my illness and all the symptoms that it causes, whether it's the fatigue or, I do office work, so it's easy to adapt to working from home. I really just need sort of a computer and an internet connection and some free time, or some quiet time rather, because of course everyone's sort of working from home and everybody's home, right? So luckily, with the situation that I have between my husband and I work wise, we're able to sort of manage all that all right. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. I realize for everybody, and I've heard that through some people who've approached me, in my role with the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance or with CAPA. There was someone that contacted me at one point in the middle of the pandemic who, works as a daycare provider, right? So for some of those frontline workers, it's not going to be as easy for them to adapt to that. And right, that's where some of the income support that are being offered by government are really important, right? To help sustain them, because there's a fear, right, of if I come into contact with people, it's going to increase my risk even more. And then I'm on immunosuppressants. What is that going to mean? So yeah, so I really count my blessings when it comes to that. That's the worst thing I need to worry about is having a quiet space. And, my employer's been pretty accommodating and that sort of thing, because everyone instantly just had to, work from home. So I didn't have to do anything extra to sort of access that. The one ironic thing, though, and then the one thing I'll mention in terms of people with arthritis is I know that's like an accommodation we often ask for, is to be able to work from home. Like if you do have the sort of job that is amenable to that, like I said, maybe as a daycare provider, that's obviously not as possible. So in some ways, it can be a positive element. And that's why I really hope that a lot of employers going forward, right, look at creating inclusive policies like that fit me without me having to always ask to be treated differently than everyone else. It's not always easy. I know even myself over the years, I've had to do that at times, and it's hard to always be sort of the odd duck, right, in the team, because the fatigue that helps with your concentration, commuting can be exhausting. So, in some ways, I see that transition to working from home can be a positive thing. And I really do hope that it's something that's here to stay.
Laurie, let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Questions about COVID 19 and COVID 19 vaccines? Should you get the vaccine if you have arthritis? What about the side effects or risks? Get the latest information about COVID 19 and what you need to know if you have arthritis. Visit our resource on the subject at arthritis.ca/COVID-19. Stay safe and follow necessary precautions to stay healthy. Welcome back as we talk about navigating the pandemic with Laurie Proulx. Laurie, many people have found new hobbies, found time for new activities, and new ways to take care of themselves. Have you adopted new routines to take care of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with the blurring of work and home and all these things, it's something I guess I've learned slowly over the last year, right? It's at first it was sort of like probably working too hard was I was guilty of, but eventually I did find at least some new hobbies, right, to spend my time. Like I am quite an avid, like I love to exercise, even and I know it would probably be surprising to most given the amount of joint damage I have, and that from my juvenile idiopathic arthritis that I've had for 30 years. But I really miss Zumba. I used to do Zumba class and these sorts of things. So, which of course all closed, and I honestly am not too comfortable returning yet until I get vaccinated and there gets to be a bit more herd immunity, like in the community. So yeah, I've had to shift to walks in the neighborhood, different like videos or exercise routines that are maybe pre-recorded and available online. As well, I've taken up different things with my kids as well, and beyond obviously video games. It's probably gotten to be too big of a part of our lives with the purchase of a new system to kind of help us get through the winter. But things like baking bread, and I think a lot of people have done that. I'm not alone in finding that new pursuit. But it's actually decent enough to do even with the damage to my hands and that sort of thing. So in some ways, probably a good exercise for my hands, not dissimilar from a lot of what my occupational therapist or something had recommended years ago to me. But as well as soap making, that's one thing I've done with my son that he helps partake in. And so yeah, it's kind of gotten to be a bit of something that we can do together as well to pass the time at home and I guess become more self-sufficient, and independent, and finding ways to be more self-reliant.
You are indeed absolutely not the only person who's baked bread during the pandemic. I, for one, can attest to the fact that results may vary. But yeah, it got to a point where I think yeast started running out in grocery stores, even.
Yes, I know, and hence the advent of sourdough bread, right? Because people would make their own starters, and that's one thing. It's on my list of things to still do, but I haven't quite gotten there yet.
New hobbies, new activities, lots of change. I think change is the key word of the year. How have your treatments and care changed?
Yeah, well, I mean, I with physical distancing coming into play pretty quickly, as of a year ago now, I mean, I haven't actually seen my rheumatologist in person since that time. So yeah, we transitioned to virtual care pretty quickly, or phone calls even. And in some case, I guess that's technically still virtual care, but I have been able to do some video calls with my rheumatologist, or even, they supervise students in clinic as well. I'm at an academic center. So yeah, I could see them as well. Really, it's quite nice to have that option. I think it's something that a lot of patients or people living with arthritis have been asking for. So that's another thing I hope that sticks around. Post pandemic, or I guess as things return to whatever our lives will look like afterwards. Definitely some challenges, though, I can imagine to that still. Like, I remember on my last call, I'm trying to explain like what's happening with a certain part of my body, but right when that one was a phone call, so it was a little more challenging to relay like the exact part of my body, what part of that body, because it's all about the tendons and ligaments and and the joints, right? It's not just joint specific. So, there can definitely be some challenges, but it's been quite nice to be able to access care in that way. As well with medications, in the beginning of the pandemic, especially, I wasn't able to fill my medications to, I usually be able to get 2 or 3 months at a time, but they were limiting that and did so, I think, until about June or so of last year, I guess, just because there was fear that medication supply was at risk, right? And because trade was sort of affected as well. So, and of course, people taking hydroxychloroquine being particularly hard hit early on in the pandemic because of the hope of what hydroxychloroquine could bring to people with COVID 19. So that was challenging. I know in my role with Kappa, we've tried to spend a lot of work, working with other arthritis organizations, including the Arthritis Society and rheumatologists as well, to kind of bring awareness to that and try to make sure that people had access to hydroxychloroquine. Obviously, we can't just switch medications. Just like that, because I've switched off of hydroxychloroquine a few years ago. That could have very well been me. I've been on the medication on and off several times in my 30 years with arthritis, but at this point in time, I wasn't at least directly affected by that.
Yes, it was a very stressful time for many Canadians as they weren't certain they would have access to their very important medication. And so the Arthritis Society was also one of the advocacy group who strongly advised that the government look into that situation and make sure it was a top priority for them to guarantee that Canadians from all over the country would have access to their medication in a timely fashion. Fortunately, the situation was resolved pretty quickly, and that was a big positive. But I think the best positive news we've got in 2021 most definitely is the fact that we now have a vaccine, which is being rolled out to the general population as we speak. Laurie, you have RA, and the current recommendation from NACI, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, is people with RA should speak to their doctors before getting the vaccine. Is that a conversation you've already had?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some early conversations with my rheumatologist about it. And of course, I think because things are dynamic, right? As we can all appreciate, even in terms of vaccine rollout in each of the provinces and the territories, or if you're living on reserve or not. So, yeah, I mean, I've had an early conversation and we'll likely need to have a follow up one as well, just to discuss it. But it's something that I feel. personally anyways, quite comfortable with getting the vaccination. Because I guess it's had such a impact on my life. I would say I would say to a greater extent even than other people who don't live with arthritis. I think the pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on people living with all sorts of rheumatic conditions. So quite supportive of that as well. Was fortunate. I've been active as a patient partner and research for quite some time, something that's actually quite close to my heart. I have a great deal of respect for the whole research and the creation of scientific knowledge. I guess as a patient who's benefited from so many years of that, I think biologics, for example, I may not even be here if it weren't for biologics coming on the market when they did. So as a result, I'm quite active as a patient partner in research as well in rheumatology, where I sit with researchers and scientists of all sorts, whether they're epidemiologists or infectious disease doctors, and we all sat down and went through a formal process led by Dr. Glenn Hazelwood, who is the chair of the guidelines committee at the Canadian Rheumatology Association. Sat there and looked at the evidence and developed a recommendation. They did a review of the evidence and had come up with a recommendation that favors vaccination, broadly speaking, for people with rheumatic conditions or autoimmune rheumatic conditions. So it was really great to be sort of part of that process. And it's nice to see that they see the importance of patient contributions as well to sort of provide context to, exactly explaining the impact that the pandemic has had, what sort of risk-benefit decisions might they make, what would patients sort of broadly prefer. So it was really, great. And it was nice to feel like part of the solution as well to the pandemic, that I'm making a contribution as an individual citizen, bringing in my 30 years of living with the illness, right? And bringing that lived experience to the table, right? And no, not, and it's still a very scientific process, not to say, but it does provide an important perspective that sort of brings together the science and the evidence with patient experiences and patient needs and wants. So yeah, quite pleased to have contributed to that. It was very very intense and that, but I'm really glad in hindsight having participated in the panels, that ultimately made that recommendation.
Meaningful work, that is for sure. Perhaps a parting thought, Laurie. Do you have a message to anyone out there listening who is living with arthritis on what's to come?
I think we probably won't forget the impact it's had on our lives. And so I think we'll be slowly pulling out of things. And let's just hope that when things go back to whatever they are, that, some of those good things are here to stay, like the virtual care, like the working from home, but also, just in terms of vaccine rollout, if they're, be sure to, and I realize everybody's at a different place, but to be sure to sort of take active steps to be part of your care, right? If you're, I know with CAPA, we've been trying to develop resources, and I'm sure the Arthritis Society has as well, to support people. But, look and see, are you a prioritized group? Are you not? Where do you go for the information? So to continue to kind of advocate for yourself on an individual level. We're trying to pull together whatever information is needed as well, as I'm sure others are, but just make sure that you're not getting left behind. Advocate for yourself. And I know it's more work and I know it's exhausting. And, as someone who's had to do it a lot over 30 years, but ultimately it's something I think that everyone should do for themselves, right? Just to make sure that they're not being left behind while everyone else can go back to whatever our new lives will look like.
Thank you for sharing your story with us today. Thanks for taking the time, and we wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Flourish the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this series to get notifications when new episodes are available. If you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to us at info@arthritis.ca.
The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests. They do not reflect the opinions or views of the Arthritis Society.